The summer of my sophomore year of college, I took a job at a Christian camp. My role was to take 12 teenagers on a 400-mile bike ride from Osipe, New Hampshire, over the White Mountains to Lake Champlain, New York, and back. At least that was the plan. The day before the kids were supposed to arrive, my co-counselor bailed because he was diagnosed with mono. In order to maintain appropriate supervision ratios, the camp decided, in their infinite wisdom, let's just say the bus driver is a co-leader. Now, Dave was an overweight, balding 60-year-old man who could not make this ride without it killing him. He also hated children. His idea of a welcome wagon was to tell them, I don't trust a single one of you fuckers, and quite frankly, I don't like you either. That was a moment that I knew that I was all on my own. In order to make the journey more exciting, on a rotating basis, 2 kids at a time came down with diarrhea. It's not terribly surprising, given that boys that age can't go 5 minutes without sticking their filthy hands in one orifice or another. I did all of the cooking, partly out of fear, but mostly out of sense of survival. I had 2 things going for me at the time. The first was that I was in peak physical condition, and if I rode like Lance Armstrong, I could eventually catch them. The second was that I was studying psychology, and young boys are more motivated by food than Pavlov's dogs. So we arranged our trip in a series of 20 to 40-mile rides from one grocery store to the next, wherein these kids would descend upon the grocery store like locusts. Now, kids already eat more than a coal-fired furnace, so keeping these kids fed, especially with all that bicycling, was almost impossible. It also meant that they would make a deal with the devil if they thought they could get an extra Twinkie out of the deal. Now, even though this was supposed to be a Christian camp, I'm actually convinced that the devil personally selected each and every one of the children in my care. The worst of them was a sociopath. He had no sense of right and wrong, no guilt, and more charisma than Tom Sawyer. On a regular basis, he would get the other kids to do this awful stuff, and then he would just sit back and admire the chaos. For example, he convinced the kleptomaniac that it would be a good idea to steal a magazine in exchange for a Twinkie. Unfortunately, the klepto got caught stealing the magazine. Fortunately, rather than prosecuting for shoplifting, the owner decided he was going to make him clean the convenience store toilets. I don't think he ate another Twinkie for the rest of his life. One time, we were having burritos for dinner, and there were 2 kids who still wanted more, but only 1 burrito left. Rather than doing the sensible thing, like, split it, the sociopath says, whichever one of you finishes the burrito in your hand first can have the last one. A kid that they called Ogre proceeded to stuff his face and promptly choke. But he wasn't making any of the common signs indicating that he was having trouble. He stopped chewing, and his eyes glazed over a bit, and I knew that I needed to do the Heimlich maneuver. They called him Ogre for a reason, and I asked him to get down on his knees just so I could get in proper position. After 1, 2, 3, the third final thrust, this disgusting mass of food comes out, followed by, you can have the last burrito. Now, because most of our trip was in the mountains, some of these climbs were absolutely brutal. But that also meant that on the downhill side, sometimes we could go 5 miles just coasting. The sociopath convinced the egomaniac that if he took his feet out of the toe clips, put them behind him, rested his seat on his belly, and rode his bike like a torpedo, that would reduce his wind resistance. And by doing that, he could go faster, and he'd be the first one down to the bottom of the mountain. And he was right. Right until he hit that first hairpin turn that he couldn't navigate. He went sailing over the guardrail, landing 30 feet from the road. He left this crater in a pile of leaves on the ground. Okay. He was okay by a sheer miracle, but his bike was completely totaled. As punishment, he had to ride in the van with Dave until we got a new bike. So, one of the other kids on the trip was a pyromaniac. Now, when we got to one of the camps, rather than being satisfied with the fire in our particular campsite, the sociopath convinced the pyromaniac that it would actually be a good idea to start fires in the neighboring camps. Now, Smokey the Bear would have beat the shit out of this kid, but I wasn't allowed to do that. A couple days later, I was across from a big field and I smelled smoke, and I knew it was my kid. I went running as fast as I possibly could, only to find that this kid had taken a can of spray deodorant and turned it into a flamethrower. Now, that's okay if the can is full, but what you need to know is that when the can starts getting lower and lower, the flame will get closer and closer to the valve, whereon it will melt. And if you're not careful, the can will explode. So I took the can, I threw it on the ground, I covered it up with a towel, but I couldn't put the thing out. I screamed, "Water, now!" But without missing a beat, the sociopath says, "Piss on it, boys!" 12 of them circled around this smoldering grenade to form a fire brigade. While I'm going to get water, I hear one of the kids say, "Dude, piss on the fire, not my shoes." "Sorry, I'm all out. I just needed to shake." I was so disgusted. I didn't want to look. Really, I didn't. But I also needed to make sure that the fire was out before this grenade blew off their collective wieners. I came up to them and said, "Oh, for the sake of God, please just take the water and pour it out. The smell of the right guard and the towel and the burnt urine is enough to make me vomit." Okay. It surely has to be an act of God that we all made it back safely. I never went back to that camp, and I will never, ever allow myself to be outnumbered like that again.